In the summer of 1900, China stood at a crossroads. The Boxer Rebellion, a desperate uprising of peasants and martial artists against foreigners and the Qing dynasty's weakness, had ended in disaster. Beijing was occupied by foreign troops. The Qing government, humiliated and powerless, was forced to sign one of the harshest treaties in Chinese history, the Boxer Protocol. But while the dynasty appeared to survive, it was only a matter of time. In just over a decade, the last emperor of China, a child named Puyi, would be forced to abdicate, ending more than 2,000 years of imperial rule. This is the story of those final years, a decade of reform, resistance, and revolution, from 1901 to 1912. The bridge between the ashes of the Boxer Rebellion and the dawn of modern China. The Boxer Protocol of 1901 crippled the Qing dynasty. China was forced to pay a staggering indemnity of 450 million taels of silver to be paid over nearly 40 years with interest, an impossible debt. Foreign troops were stationed permanently in Beijing. The Qing court had to apologize formally to the Western powers and Japan. For ordinary people, the humiliation was unbearable. The dynasty that claimed the mandate of heaven had once again been defeated and forced into submission by outsiders. Yet surprisingly, instead of retreating into isolation, the Qing leadership tried something new. Empress Dowager Cixi, once known for her conservatism, began to embrace reform. She approved a series of sweeping changes known as the New Policies. These reforms aimed to modernize China's military, education, and administration. Western-style schools were established, replacing the ancient civil service examination system. Military academies were built to train a new generation of officers in modern warfare. At the same time, the Qing attempted to strengthen central control by reorganizing government ministries. Officials were dispatched abroad to study constitutional monarchies, like Japan's Meiji system, in hopes of adapting them to China. But these reforms were born out of weakness, not strength. They were carried out under the watchful eyes of foreign powers, who were less interested in China's modernization than in maintaining their own spheres of influence. Meanwhile, revolutionary movements continued to grow in secret. Exiled intellectuals, disillusioned students, and overseas Chinese communities began plotting the overthrow of the Qing. The seeds of rebellion were already sprouting. In 1905, a major step was taken by revolutionaries abroad. In Tokyo, Yat-sen, a doctor-turned-political activist, united several anti-Qing groups into a single organization, the Tongmenghui, or United League. Its goals were clear: expel the Manchu rulers, restore China to the Han people, and establish a republic. The Tongmenghui spread its message through pamphlets, newspapers, and secret cells. Students returning from Japan and other foreign countries carried revolutionary ideas back home. At the same time, the Qing reforms were producing mixed results. On one hand, modern schools were spreading literacy and science. On the other, they produced a generation of students who compared China's weakness with Japan's rapid modernization and concluded that the Qing dynasty was the obstacle. The abolition of the civil service examinations, once the cornerstone of Confucian society, left countless scholars adrift. For centuries, studying the Confucian classics had been the path to success. Now, that path was gone, and resentment simmered. By 1908, tension was rising on all sides. The Qing dynasty seemed to be modernizing, but the changes only exposed its fragility. The revolutionaries were gaining strength, and the court itself was about to face a crisis that would seal its fate. In November 1908, tragedy and intrigue struck the Qing court. Within just 2 days, both the Guangxu Emperor and Empress Dowager Cixi died. Rumors swirled that Cixi had poisoned Guangxu to prevent him from undoing her legacy. Historians still debate the truth, but the result was clear. China was left without a stable ruler. Onto the throne was placed a child, the 2-year-old Puyi, who would reign as the Xuantong Emperor. Carried into the Forbidden City, dressed in yellow robes far too large for him, Puyi had no understanding of the empire he now symbolically ruled. Real power rested with regents and court officials, particularly Prince Chun, Puyi's father. But the regency was plagued with indecision, corruption, and factional disputes. The dynasty tried to push forward with reforms. In 1908, a plan was announced for a constitutional monarchy, with the promise of a parliament within 9 years. But to many Chinese, this was too little, too late. They saw Japan, where a parliament had been functioning since the 1890s, and compared it with the empty promises of the Qing. Meanwhile, the financial crisis deepened. In 1911, the Qing court attempted to nationalize China's railways to raise funds. This meant seizing control from provincial investors and handing lucrative contracts to foreign banks. The move sparked outrage across southern China, where merchants, gentry, and students felt betrayed. Railway protection movements broke out, adding fuel to revolutionary sentiment. In the military, discontent was also spreading. The Beiyang Army, China's most modern force, was loyal not to the dynasty, but to its commander, Yuan Shikai. Revolutionary groups secretly infiltrated garrisons, spreading pamphlets and whispering promises of a new China. Many young officers, trained in modern academies and exposed to new political ideas, began to sympathize with the revolutionaries. The Qing court still imagined it commanded an army, but in reality, its soldiers were divided, some loyal to Yuan, others to their provincial commanders, and more than a few leaning toward the revolution. This fragile loyalty would shatter in 1911, when the spark of uprising finally came. On October 10, 1911, a small accident in Wuchang set the stage for a dramatic turning point in China's history. When a bomb stored by secret revolutionaries exploded by mistake, the authorities rushed to investigate, uncovering a plot that involved many local soldiers. The Qing dynasty's own new army troops, modernized and influenced by revolutionary ideas, decided to rise up rather than face arrest. Instead of outsiders starting the revolt, it was these Qing soldiers who mutinied, seized control of Wuchang, and proclaimed a new government. Civilian revolutionaries joined them, but what started as a military mutiny quickly spiraled into a nationwide revolution. As news spread, province after province declared independence from the Qing, marking the beginning of the end for China's last imperial dynasty. The Qing dynasty, desperate to save itself, turned to Yuan Shikai, the powerful general who commanded the Beiyang army. Yuan had been sidelined earlier by the court, but now he was recalled and given authority to suppress the revolution. But Yuan was no loyalist. He realized the Qing dynasty's days were numbered. Instead of crushing the revolution outright, he negotiated with both sides. In exchange for becoming president of the new republic, he persuaded the court to abdicate peacefully. On February 12, 1912, the 6-year-old Puyi, the last emperor of China, issued an edict of abdication. The Qing dynasty was over. More than 2,000 years of imperial rule had come to an end. The years between 1901 and 1912 form a bridge in Chinese history, a decade in which the old world tried to modernize, only to be swept away by forces too powerful to resist. The Boxer Rebellion had exposed the dynasty's weakness. The new policy's reforms came too late. The enthronement of a child emperor symbolized how little control the Qing had left. And when revolution erupted, even their most trusted general chose to side with the future rather than the past. Puyi's abdication marked not only the end of a dynasty, but the end of imperial China itself. What followed would be decades of turmoil: the fragile republic, the rise of warlords, Japanese invasion, civil war, and eventually the founding of the People's Republic. But it all began in these final years, in the shadow of the Boxers and the rise of a child emperor. The last decade of the Qing dynasty remains one of the most dramatic turning points in Chinese history. If you enjoyed this journey through history, consider subscribing and sharing it with others who love the past.